Welcome everyone to our beautiful evening here in the connection field with Chief Phillip Scott, and he's here with us for this beautiful, as we're passing through the one day into the new moon. And tonight we have an amazing offering from Phillip, the medicine of love. And it feels so appropriate as mass consciousness is thinking about this month as the month of love and Sunday as, Valentine's Day. We have the opportunity here to go deeper. And I'm really thrilled and excited to be here tonight. And so welcome all of you on Facebook Live. And we do invite you into the Connection Field's Zoom loving room. And you come in through the Connection Field digest.org. So we're going to just jump right in. And I just want to say that just really it's a privilege to be here with Phillip and to deepen into this weaving of wisdom and rooting ourselves in Indigenous culture and shamanic teaching. So with that, Phillip, it's all yours. And thank you for always choosing to be here. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, relations, wherever it is that you find yourself upon our blessed and beautiful Mother Earth. I'm known as Shunkawa Kansapa, which is Lakota for Black Horse, and I'm very honored to share with you this evening about the medicine of love, as well as a celebration of this approaching new moon in the time of deep darkness. And not that it's negative at all, but actually it's going back to the primordial void of creation, into the womb of the mother, into the beginning. And for me, it's appropriate for us to speak about the medicine of love at this time, as traditionally within the Western colonial world, the 14th of February is regarded as Valentine's Day. So I'm going to encourage all of you, before we talk of sacred matters, that you cleanse yourself off with sage or any plant medicine that is indigenous to your area. And I do encourage all of you to discover what those plant medicines are in your region that have been employed by indigenous peoples to cleanse and purify themselves. I'm going to be cleansing myself off again. I had previously, before we commenced our conversation, but it's always good to continue to purify in this time. And so you ignite the smoking mixture, whatever it is, or whatever plant medicine you'll be employing, washing your hands through the smoke, taking the smoke over your head, to your heart, to your belly, down each leg, top to bottom, and then touch the earth to ground that prayer. And then if you are sitting beside an altar, then you cleanse off the altar by wafting the smoke over the altar, but not passing anything over it, some physical object, other than the smoke itself. It is traditional for us to commence in a song, so I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and to place your hands to your heart today as I sing a song to honor the heart, which is the nexus, it's the bridge, it's the compass that directs our lives, and it's customarily known as the place of our feelings and our emotions, where the genesis of love is derived in the heart. again, take a nice deep breath into your body, and then direct that breath into your heart. And feel your heart expand, that as you exhale, you allow whatever walls, whatever armor, whatever barriers that we have constructed to protect our hearts, we allow them to dissolve with each successive exhalation. And as a consequence of allowing the dissolution of these barriers and these walls, our heart expands and it fills our rib cage. And we hold ourselves. The heart is ensconced in a cage of bone for protection. So we can allow our love to emanate from our heart through our rib out into the world, but to know that it is safe. And we can hold ourselves, we can embrace ourselves. We can wrap our arms around ourselves and cradle our heart, because that is the ground of true love, is self-love. And in fact, that is a genesis from which all other love can arise. If we do not love ourselves, then it will be difficult for us to receive the love from others, because the world is a mirror. So if we do not love ourselves, then whatever love is surrounding us will not be reflected back to us, because we will not be able to see or receive or experience it. I like to say that every day is Valentine's Day. Every day is an opportunity for us to love ourselves and each other. I'm often troubled in this Western world how we designate a day for a mother, or the earth, or a tree, or the father, for love, when in fact, every day is Valentine's Day. Every day is an opportunity to express our love toward ourselves and one another in this world. Every day is Mother's Day. Every day is Father's Day, Earth Day, and Arbor Day. The arbitrary acknowledgement of Indigenous Peoples Month, or the Black Lives Month. I mean, all of these things are interesting, how we tend to compartmentalize the way that we try to celebrate and honor life. But the reality is that oftentimes in the Western colonial experience, we tend to continue to seek outside for love. The externalized experience of love. Oh, there is quite a bit of workshops that are focusing on trying to find the beloved, trying to find a partner. When in fact, the true quest is to recognize and see yourself as the beloved. When you truly love and appreciate yourself for who you are, and can embrace your own belovedness, then the universe can allow a beloved to appear as a reflection of the belovedness that you perceive and experience within yourselves. So we tend to try to fill a void or a vacuum inside of us by seeking love outside, when in fact we must fill ourselves with love first. And through the acknowledgement of our own intrinsic belovedness, then the beloved can appear in the world as a genuine expression of us discovering that true love inside of us. No, there's movies and this, romantic notion that there will be someone who completes us. But for me, that means that there is something lacking within ourselves. And so we're not bringing 100% of ourselves into the relationship that we're in because we're expecting someone else to fill that void or that vacuum that we are incapable of achieving ourselves. Whereas it is my firm conviction that we bring 100% of ourselves to every relationship. So it's not 50-50, but it's 100 and 100. Right? Then we have completeness within the relationship, but the other person isn't completing you because you come in complete, loving and accepting yourself as you are. And then as a consequence, they in turn can appreciate, love, and respect you as you are. And so this notion of the romantic ideal of love, right, that it's the knight in shining armor who is there to save the day or to rescue the damsel in distress, this is a paradigm that must be completely eradicated. Because in both situations, it really undermines each person's genuine love and sovereignty. And so this is what I wish to share with you today, relations, is that we stop looking outside for love and turn the gaze inward to begin to love and appreciate oneself. And that's not always a facile journey. However, that is truly the only quest that we have, is to discover who we are and to love even the parts of ourselves that require attention. I recall that many years ago, my wife, who's now in the spirit world, and I were traveling to San Francisco to participate in a book signing and presentation by a Lakota chief. His name was Russell Means, and he was a Lakota activist with the American Indian movement. And he wrote a book entitled Where White Men Fear to Tread. And he traveled the country on this book tour, arriving in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he shared story that evening. And at the conclusion of his talk, there was a question and answer session. And a non-native gentleman stood up in the audience and inquired, "What do you think of white people participating in your ceremonies?" And the chief grew quiet for a moment and then stated, "Take the whole pie, not just the piece that's comfortable." And for me, part of that teaching has to do with this notion of assimilation, that people tend to extract the favorable or pleasant portions of the indigenous path and incorporate them into their lives. Whereas what the chief was stating is that you must take the totality of the path, truly embrace the culture, both with its challenges as well as with its blessings. And I see that not only applicable to walking the indigenous way, but to the path of love for oneself. Now, there's a tendency that we have in our culture in the West, in the colonial world, to denigrate or criticize ourselves and the parts of ourselves that require compassionate, loving, and attention. But in that denigration, it only continues to spiral into more and deeper self-recrimination. Whereas the point is to embrace the totality of ourselves, to bring a kind, loving, and compassionate regard for those places that maybe are forms of addiction or patterns from our family or our past. So we do not judge those unpleasant aspects of ourselves, but rather we cradle them, much as we would cradle a child or an infant who is weeping and crying. Do we harm that child, strike that child? No, we're going to lovingly cradle that child. And so we can see those aspects of ourselves that require some attention as those children, that require tenderness and kindness. And so we shift this notion, denigration of, shall we say, cutting. And we see this kind of as a metaphor. Often there are our youth are cutting themselves. And I see that as a metaphor of the way that we are constantly under siege, and we place ourselves under siege, constantly criticizing ourselves and others, which is counterproductive and continues to undermine our confidence and our self-esteem and who we are. And I'm not saying that we should deny, the parts of ourself that requires attention, fears, issues, wounds, addictions, but rather we address them with kindness and with love so that we can shed light upon them, reveal them, and therefore utilize this for healing. So I have spoken about this in previous sessions and gatherings, that it is important for us, in order for the healing process to occur, that we identify these things that require attention and healing. For if we don't acknowledge them, their existence, then we cannot begin to address them and liberate ourselves from those shackles. Is at the ground of the human experience within our DNA, and as many of you know, DNA in this case is in relationship to descendants and ancestors, which the poet and Lakota activist John Trudell would state. Inside our DNA is an experience of unconditional love. For any of our viewers and listeners today on this call, if you are a parent, chances are you understand what unconditional love is in relationship to your children. And therefore, in most instances, all children have an experience within themselves and within their lives of unconditional love. Now, there are certain instances when children have not experienced unconditional love. Perhaps their parents were neglectful or violent. And there are certainly individuals in this world who, as a result of their own wounding, will lash out and harm children, and so therefore are not expressing unconditionality in relationship to loving. And so there are certainly children who were deprived of unconditional love in their upbringing. That said, they still have an experience of unconditional love because one's true parents are Mother Earth and Father Sky. So they have an experience of unconditional love from the mother and the father, but perhaps not from their human parents. Nevertheless, whether it be from the biological parents or from Mother Earth and Father Sky, every single human being has an experience of unconditional love, which also means unconditional acceptance for who they are. And as a consequence, unfortunately, of our society, this kind of loving is essentially bred out of us. And we learn to place conditions upon our loving, certain dependencies upon our loving. And so we broker love rather than have the open field of unconditionality in the expression of our loving. So that is essentially one of the quests, is to remember and embody that unconditionality when it comes to how we love ourselves first and foremost, and then how we love others. Well, to be clear, when I'm referring to unconditional love, that does not mean that there is a lack of boundary. Does not mean in any way, shape, or form that we accept abuse from others. So unconditionality means complete acceptance, but it does not mean that it grants an individual the right to disrespect you. Quite the contrary. When you have genuine love and respect for yourselves, you will not permit or grant abuse to take place within your person or even toward others around you. And again, parents can certainly support when I say that in that unconditionality with one's children, that doesn't mean that they're granted permission to run rimshot, that there are still boundaries upon which we have that field from which we can express love. So I wanted to share with you today about the nature of love, right? That it really is the ground of unconditionality, and that it really begins with ourselves. And then from there, it can ripple out from this place. Now, as a consequence of the fears and abuse and trauma and the conditioning of our societies, then we often will place armoring, barriers, walls around our loving and our heart, because we are fearful of being hurt. And so these strategies can certainly work in our lives for a time, but ultimately they're unsustainable. And so we learn eventually how to release these boundaries, meaning the walls around our hearts, so that we can love and experience life more fully. Because all loving in relationship to others is a risk. And so if you're going to love, you must be willing to bleed, because we live in a world of impermanence. And so either the relationship that you have with someone that you are cultivating may come to an end because two individuals have grown apart from one another, and therefore it is necessary for them to walk in a separate kind of way. Or we may have a situation where this love has cultivated itself and unites people in great strength and great togetherness. And yet a time will come when the Creator calls one of those individuals home. And so there is the bleeding of the heart in the form of bereavement, in the form of the grief that one experiences when one's beloved in the physical makes their journey. But if one is not willing to love, then one on some level is also not willing to live. Because, as I said, if you're going to love, you're going to grieve. You will experience loss in this world of impermanence, which therefore does not mean that one should not risk loving, but rather one embraces that love and fully accepts the love that is coming, knowing that it may be impermanent and that it is impermanent. And so I'm reminded of the Sufi saying, break my heart again and again and again so I can love more deeply. I'm going to say that again. It's about allowing your heart to be broken again many times so that you can love more deeply and allow source into this heart. And so we have many different forms of loving, right? There's the amor, right? The romantic kind of love, which is often a projection. You know, they say love is blind, but however, I think just the opposite. I experience love as absolute sight, absolute truth. To perceive someone in their genuine beauty. So it's not blind. However, for most, it involves projection, right? Which is, again, that romantic ideal. So that would be the amor, right? And then there's the agape, there's the unconditional kind of love, right? There's love of family, there's love of partner, there's love of children, there's different expressions of that love. It's all the same field, but that there's a diversity in terms of expression based upon one's relationships. And all of these, it is essential for us to cultivate in our lives. But it all comes back again to oneself. And we must begin to cultivate an abiding, unconditional kind of love for ourselves, a true, genuine acceptance of who we are, the totality of ourselves, as I was speaking of earlier. For without that, we will continue to seek outside for the beloved when the beloved is already here, already intrinsic to who we are. And all that it requires is taking the time to acknowledge this truth. I'm often reminded of the great Sufi master, Hafiz. And Hafiz was walking through the market square one day when a young girl stopped him and saw his illumination. And she looked up to him and said, Master, what is the mark of someone knowing God? And Hafiz was taken aback by the wisdom of this little one. And with a twinkle in his eye, he knelt down and he cradled the face of this small, innocent child and said, my precious one, they have dropped the knife. They have dropped the cruel knife they use against themselves and others. It's my experience that we hold an invisible knife to our jugular, and we're constantly poking and cutting ourselves, thinking that we're never worthy enough, we're never good enough. And of course, it's been instilled from our families and our society, can never seem to measure up. Well, there's always someone better, more gifted, more talented, more intelligent, more beautiful than ourselves. And again, that's the eyes that are always looking out in comparison. Whereas what Hafiz is speaking of is that we drop the knife. We drop that knife that lacerates us constantly. And perhaps when we learn to drop this knife, then our teens, our youth will not cut themselves anymore, because we are emulating a different way of being in the world that does not involve criticism and condemnation of who we are, but rather a celebration of who we are, an honoring of the gifts that our youth have, to see their own intrinsic talents, to celebrate them, rather than to constantly criticize them and condemn them, and therefore instill inside of them that knife that they will then use to cut themselves, and then it continues into the next generations. And so I encourage all of you, therefore, in this call, to drop the knife, the cruel knife you're using against yourself and others. I'm reminded of an individual that I once knew who literally never had an unkind word for anyone. She had the capacity to always see the goodness inside of someone, even when they were not able to see it themselves. I'm also reminded of what happens in many indigenous villages in Africa, because the relationship there is one of community and interdependence. So if there's an individual who is acting out or doing things in a disrespectful or unloving way, because that toxicity then affects the collective, they will essentially allow this individual into the center of a hoop or a circle, and then bestow this individual with love. Help them to realize that they are loved and appreciated for who they are. Now, that does not condone the actions that may have been inappropriate or disrespectful. So they're educated about that, but for them to understand that they are human and that they are still loved. And as a consequence of that, it gives them the opportunity to have that alchemy. Perhaps they are not able to see themselves, but with the multiple mirrors of reflection in that hoop, often there's a softening, a tenderizing, if you will, in a good way, that allows that heart and that armoring to soften, so that they can receive the love that is coming in from the outside. So those walls and those barriers and that armor that is erected out of protection and safety, that is ultimately unsustainable, as I mentioned, becomes available. Available for them to receive the love from those around them, which they themselves may have forgotten. So I wanted to open it up now to those who are on this call to share their reflections or their feedback about what I'm sharing, so that we can have more of a rich dialogue about this topic. So if there's someone that would like to share, I would be most appreciative.
I'd like to share. Hi. Nice to see you again. Nice to be here to celebrate love. Years ago, before I met my husband, I met a woman, and her name was Mary Valentine, coincidentally. And she said to me, I was single at the time, and she said to me, wow, do you want to, meet your mate? I said, yeah. She says, well, you have a lot of armor around your heart. You're going to have to disarm all these cages you put around it. are you willing to do that? And as you were speaking about, once you've been wounded or hurt, you just maybe protect yourself from that ever happening again. She said, are you willing to let go of the armor? And I said, yes, I am. She said, okay. And I don't know what she did, but maybe it was through the power of intention, soon after I met my husband. And so it's funny that her name was Mary Valentine.
Indeed, that's a very beautiful confluence of circumstances for you. And obviously, she identified something that you needed to work on, and as a consequence, you worked on it, and the beloved from the outside came in, right? Because if we are armored, right, if we are defended or protected, then it actually works both ways. Our love cannot be expressed to the world, nor can we receive the love from those around us.
True. That's true. I hadn't thought of that. That's true. It's like a fear of being rejected. Maybe there's some kind of armor, to come out and express love for fear of being rejected. Yeah,
Exactly.
so receiving and giving, probably.
Yeah, because that's so love is a dance that way, right? So again, there's an expression, but also a reception, right? So actually there's individuals that are very good at loving them, loving others, but they don't love themselves, right? And so again, there's not going to be that ability to receive love from others if it doesn't start within ourselves.
Yeah, it felt really nice when you were speaking about, hugging ourselves and seeing the beloved inside ourselves, and also that story of the people in Africa. I just think it's so beautiful to experience another culture's way of dealing with someone who's misbehaved by acknowledging their goodness. What a unusual way to deal with that, but such a positive and important way to focus on the positive. It's that story we've all heard about the wolves, the two wolves inside of us, the good wolf and the bad wolf. And which one are we going to feed? If we feed that good side of someone and help them see that self-love, or maybe help disarm, like this woman helped me see that I was armed. Maybe that is one of the ways we can help each other, is to let each other see that at first that it's there. I didn't even realize I had it there. So there's some kind of education that can happen where we can reveal that to ourselves and to each other. Wow.
Exactly.
Really. I've heard this story before, but it's like a new awakening. It's like another level of opening up to that beautiful feeling that we can all be together and share in. How wonderful that is. What a beautiful subject, love. On so many levels and so many ways that we have. It's there was this Rasta guy in my neighborhood today doing some roofing, and I said, "Ja love" to him. He just lit up, It's like you say a couple words to someone, like we said, Irie. Irie means bliss in Jamaican. Ja is God. You just say a couple words to somebody, and all of a sudden it reminds them, of the love. That's what we are here to do. That's what I'm here to do. I think we're all here to do this time, especially.
I believe actually that for me, the binding force of this universe is love, right? That's the force that unites all of creation is love, right? And as I said, we have love of source, love of ancestors, love of the earth, all of which is unconditional. And we have, as Chogyam Trungpa, the great Buddhist teacher, who brought essentially the Dharma to the West, he talks about intrinsic goodness, right? That fundamentally all human beings are intrinsically good, but we often just forget that. So when we can take a moment to remind ourselves and also others of our intrinsic goodness, then we can begin to live and walk a different way. Because the beauty of the story I just shared is that it's not based on punishment, right? Because punishment also allows for denigration, but rather reminding them of their goodness and their gifts and their talents, right? To also identify where they have misbehaved, but to put them back on track, right? Kind of like analogous to a person who is in recovery, right? And they may have an addiction, and maybe they'll stumble in their addiction. And do you denigrate them or condemn them or criticize them for their stumbling? No, because that's actually going to be counterproductive and may actually cause them to spiral more into deeper depression and addiction. Or rather, you identify with compassion and love where they've stumbled and help to put them back on that track again, right? It actually reminds me of how one would train an animal, right? There's two different kinds of conditioning. There's what's called classical conditioning, which involves reward and punishment. And then there's operant conditioning, which is really accentuating favorable behaviors, right? Meaning honoring and celebrating favorable behaviors, right? And if we see that in terms of having to condition our children, right? Punishment is never an effective means of trying to shape behavior, right? Because often later on in life, it will engender recalcitrance and rebelliousness and defiance, right? Whereas if we are helping to guide them by honoring and celebrating favorable behavior, then that is what's reinforced.
Mm.
So again, it depends on how you wish to shape an individual's mind and heart, body, and spirit, right? And it can be done through punishment, but punishment really is never an effective incentive, right? It's usually a deterrent, right? And we see this in our penal system as well, right? You know, I work in a penitentiary, and generally, if it's taken, if the focus really isn't on rehabilitation, then there's a chance for recidivism, a repetition of these unpleasant behaviors if and when they're returned to society. Whereas helping them to identify the source of their pain and their wounding and to bring compassion and understanding to that allows for healing to take place, which thereby changes their behavior and therefore allows them to liberate themselves and therefore actually to speed up the way through which they go through the world and perhaps are returned to society. So, is there anyone else that would care to share before we continue with the ceremony?
I just want to acknowledge Linda, who just came into the Zoom. Oh, maybe she popped off. I think she.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah. Can I talk?
Sure.
Twice in one day. Pretty amazing. Well, I just talking about love. My mother passed away in 2018, and she lived at my house for 9 months before she passed. And after she passed, the experience of having her at my house was just a blessing, a gift. I learned so many things just being her caregiver. and
Mhm.
being the one to assist her, but and to her visions that she would see. But after she passed and I went through lots of things in the family, I realized all the gifts and the love that had been blessed to me growing up as a child through all of my relatives. And I just started writing down all the people that had gifted me in my life. And then, I mean, every person that you meet can gift you in a certain way, but certain people just will touch your spirit in a deeper way, and you make a different connection.
Mhm.
So I really see that now in people that in my family, perhaps, or others that I maybe don't get along with, and it's changed how I look at them. And I don't know, I just feel my life has been totally blessed, and I'm so grateful that I've realized that, because I'm getting older.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, thank you for sharing that. As I mentioned, love is the binding force of this universe, and source, ancestors, and earth love us unconditionally. And so the beauty of love is that it transcends time and space, which is why we can palpably feel the love of those who have passed on in our lives, because it is an expression of that love and how the ancestors take care of us from the other side. And the beauty is that every single person who touches our life and that we can have an opportunity to love shapes and transforms us for the future. And as you mentioned, as a result of all the copious gifts that your mother bestowed upon you in the 9 months, and kind of, we'll call it that the pregnancy at the end of her life, right? These 9 months that you had, that's a birth. It was a birthing for yourself as well. And what we can say is that even though we may not necessarily agree with everyone in this world, we can still love them, right? And
Yes.
it's really important for us to get to that place so that we have acceptance even of the differences, right? Because if we don't have acceptance, we have intolerance, and this intolerance then leads to violence in many different kinds of forms. And so, I'm not saying necessarily, and the reality is that it's possible to love someone, but you may not trust them, with your life. Now,
Yes,
obviously,
that's
in
true.
a healthy relationship, you need to have trust, right? If we're talking about a partnership, right, a beloved partnership, then there needs to be that level of trust for
Mhm.
that love to blossom and to grow. However, we're
Yeah.
going to encounter individuals who we may not necessarily agree with, or whose values are antithetical to our own. Now, we can still love and respect them and honor the differences, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to trust them with our lives, or with the sacred parts of ourselves.
Yes, that's true. Thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Yeah. So is there someone else that would like to share before we segue into the next part of our ceremony?
Just want to acknowledge the people that are on Facebook and who are listening tonight, and Deb and Julia and Cheryl Hickey. Nice to see you guys, and Sherry Layton and a couple of other people. Thank you for caring and sharing this medicine of love out. And I guess, wow, there's so much going through my awareness right now, because obviously, for me, I grew up in a world where love of family and love, an extenuated love, this love was great, but spiritual love for all relations, love for, the pathway of love, that was looked upon as, wimpy, and it didn't get that respect. And so it's interesting for me, because I feel like I did this jump. And what I noticed was, and even, fairly recently, that because that was such an eminent part of who I was, it was very clear to me at 12 years old that I came here for love and truth and to be that expression. That I began to live a life that was living, so there's the good, seeing the good in someone. But what I started to discover was I was living, and how do I say this, is, basically living in the potential of someone. And that was very tricky because I don't know if you can speak to that, because that's really a different, that's a very expanded love to live like that. But in reality times, you go to actually be in relationship, you're in relationship with actually something that isn't fully in its existence. Now, mind you, I totally get that it all comes back here. So, anyway, I give that to you. So, yeah, there's a lot that's moving in my consciousness tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Shelley. As I mentioned earlier, for me, love is not blind. Love is actual sight. And so part of that, when we're talking about being in relationship with someone else, is, and this actually is the quest of any sacred practices at all, is to see things as they are. And so to see things as they are is also therefore to see people as they are, to see our partner as she or he or they are, to see our family, to see our parents as they are, without necessarily trying to change them. When you're talking about seeing potential, we have to understand that that potential is also our projection of what we desire that person to become. And that can be a very dangerous proposition, because what that means is we're not riveted in the present moment, right? We're not actually seeing the individual as they are in the moment, but we are expecting them to be different, or we're seeing a possible future that they could embody, knowing that it's also our projection. And anytime that we move out of seeing the individual for who they are, then that is ultimately a denial of love, because it means that we are placing our own agenda upon who they should be. So love is also therefore in the present moment, right? And we know that to be true because when we experience the death of someone close to us, then there is a shattering of those dreams. And part of the dreams that are shattered are the possible futures that may have been spoken of or may have even been placed in motion. So therefore, it's important that we always remain centered within love, within the love of the individual, to see them as they are, right? Also, to take what they say at face value, right? Sometimes when people come to me for counseling, the individual may be very clear about what they've stated in relationship, to this person who is sitting at my altar, and yet they are not willing to accept it. Right? Because in their minds, they have a different expectation, or they see the individual differently. And so they are shattered when the individual is leaving when they said they would, because the person was denying that truth and seeing something else. Yeah. So it's important that we are careful not to project our expectations or to see a potential, right? They may or may not achieve that, because again, it's our own ideology, our own expectations of how this person is going to evolve. Right? So it becomes very tricky, right? Because oftentimes then we become kind of, there's a potential for becoming subtly manipulative because that's what you want this person to become versus what their actual path may be. Does that make any sense?
Oh, no, totally. It's, I mean, actually, Sudha would be really laughing because, I mean, I did have this relationship many years ago, and I would have been practicing meditation for like 20 years. And I ended up being in this relationship, and, you know, it was sort of the real epitome of what you're describing, because I, in my mind, it was like every time that present moment reality, which wasn't bad or good, it just was what it was. But because it wasn't my expectation, or so, but I would just go like, oh, I'm just going to go away from this for a few minutes or an hour or whatever. I'm just going to meditate, and that will shift everything. So it shifted my relationship with myself, but it didn't change the outer. But it was just an interesting, that was, you know, years ago, but it was an interesting part of the journey, you know, to really, I think that's the importance of grounding. You know, as you're saying, love exists in the present moment, and if we're not embracing who we totally are in the way that we are, you know, then we can't expect that situation to come and have it be a revelatory experience that is actually, you know, it comes back to the weaving of truth. You know, what is the actual truth, and what is truth? Oops, sorry. Sorry, my granddaughter. Speaking of love.
Exactly. Speaking of unconditional love, right? Exactly.
Over and out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, we're talking about the present moment, and we're also talking about the fear of love. We've kind of touched on that subject a little bit, but what I want to say is that love, genuine love, is liberation, right? We often in our culture, when we move into relationship, we think that it's kind of like a noose or a ball and chain, that we actually have those images, right? Whereas love is actually liberation, right? When you are willing to allow that beloved in, because that's what sometimes people will come to my altar and, you know, want to do a healing, and they say, I'm ready for my beloved. And I said, are you really ready? Because the reality is, when you see the beloved, you're going to be on a very challenging journey, because that person becomes a mirror of reflection that will allow your wounds from the past to emerge, which is also why that kind of love requires commitment. Because so many times people will, you know, fall into this amorous kind of love, and they feel the high and the addiction of it. And then when the masks fall away and the projections end, and we see that person for who they actually are, right? And your wounds are triggered or activated, and vice versa. That's when the work really begins. And so it requires that level of commitment to be able to stick with it, rather than to throw in the towel and start over again in the next relationship, because you're more addicted to the attachment to passion rather than to deeper purpose, which is ultimately healing, which is what a beloved relationship actually does for you. That in the container of that belovedness is the possibility for the alchemy of healing. And so that, for me, is why commitment and love is true liberation, because it allows for the springboard of awakening and genuine lasting healing. Which brings me to my final point before we enter into a little exercise, which is, oftentimes people say, I give you my heart. And I want to say to everyone, do not give your heart to anyone. You give your love. You don't give your heart away. There's only one individual who can safeguard your heart, and that's you. Right? But that's what we do. We have to say, we give the heart to somebody else. But ideally, there's a reason why that heart is in a cage, right? So we let the love emanate through the cage, through the ribs, but we keep the heart right in its center, right here. So we let the love out, but we don't give our heart away to someone else, right? Because oftentimes we there's that phrase, I put my heart on my sleeve. Well, what's going to happen? Someone's going to knock it off, right? So we don't keep the heart on the sleeve. We keep it firmly embedded in the rib cage to allow for the emanation of the love from the heart, but that it stays ensconced safely within ourselves, because we are truly the only ones who can care for and safeguard our hearts. So with that, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And I want you to embrace yourself tonight. I want you to wrap your arms around yourself, elbows to elbows. Feel your fingers actually touching your scapula, your shoulder blades, right? In a nice, beautiful, loving embrace to come back to yourself. Yeah. And I'd like you, any ladies on the call, to breathe deeply into your womb to begin with. Gentlemen on this call, into your solar plexus. Yeah. And I want you to feel yourself relaxing with each successive breath. So we draw deep into our centers to begin with. And now I want you to direct your breath into your heart. Breathe deeply into your heart. And again, as we did in the beginning of our call, with each exhalation, feel whatever armor, whatever boundaries and barriers and walls that you have erected to keep you safe, allow them to dissolve. With each breath, as you inhale, feel that the heart is expanding as the armor is dissolving, as the walls surrounding your heart are eroding with each exhalation. And continuing to hold yourself feel your heart expand to the size of your rib cage. And feel the safety of that cage, of that cradle that your heart is in. The cradle of the ribs, but also the cradle of your arms in this loving embrace. And with each successive breath, allow your heart to relax, to move into deeper trust and ease and peace. And allow a feeling of unconditional love and acceptance to emanate from your heart toward you. Feel the beating of your heart as it's ensconced in a double cradle. If you want, you can also slowly rock or move yourself, cradling the heart, rocking forward and backward, side to side. Feeling this unconditional love for who you are, the belovedness of who you are. the goodness of yourself. And in this full field of your heart, on this time of the new moon, when we plant seeds of intention in this full flowering heart that you now have, I'm going to pray with my flute. And I'm going to ask you to plant seeds of intention, of affirmation into your heart. These prayer seeds being something that are going to take root in your heart that will allow you to love yourself unconditionally, to appreciate who you are, to curtail any criticism or condemnation that could be transformed into compassion. And therefore also to allow for the emanation of this love to those around you. So pray for those whom you love. And also pray for those whom you have challenges with so that you can love them as well. Because we are all human beings here. We all have the capacity to love, to feel joy and to weep, to grieve those who have passed away or the experiences of loss that we may encounter on this journey through life. Just continue to rock yourself backwards and forwards or side to side, whatever feels right, allowing your heart to remain completely full, free of armoring, free of walls. Even if it's a little uncomfortable, just trust that you're coming back to yourself, that you are remaining centered, that your heart is cradled in your ribs, in your chest, with a loving embrace from your arms. And as I pray with this flute and speak aloud into your heart, planting seeds of intention for yourself, for your loved ones, for this world, because we need a lot of love right now. A lot of love is required right now with all of the dissension, all of the confusion, all of the fear. Right? Fear is transformed through love. So with that, pray aloud, everyone. Take one more deep breath. And as you bring your arms down to your sides, continue to feel that loving embrace around you. I encourage you to endeavor to keep your heart as wide and open as it is now. Don't allow the forces of circumstance in your life to begin to compress that heart, but continue to love evermore yourself and others, to have compassion, kindness, tenderness, gentleness, trust in yourself and your life. When my wife made her journey many years ago, that practice is what I would do. I would lie alone in my bed at night, and I would hold myself that way, breathing that way, coming back to myself, honoring my own belovedness and being grateful that I was able to discover my beloved in this lifetime. And also to feel the presence of her belovedness around me, her love from the other side. I often was also reading the works of Rumi at this time. And I recall the story of Rumi because he had a mentor known as Shams. And Shams completely transformed his world. And though Rumi was married with children, he had a tutelary relationship with Shams, which was deeply and profoundly transformative and loving. And in fact, Rumi had a community at that time, and because of the depth of his devotion to Shams, they were threatened by Shams, and so they sent Shams away. They forced him to leave. And in Rumi's despair, he left his community to seek Shams out again and to invite him to come back, which Shams did. And again, because of the depth of Rumi's devotion and adoration of Shams, the community again was threatened to such a degree that the scholars believe that they dispatched Shams. They actually killed him, or he disappeared and never returned to Rumi's life. And in Rumi's deep despair, because often in the poetry and the prose of Rumi, we speak and hear of the beloved. And of course, he was referring to the beloved as a source, but also to Shams. And so one day, Rumi found himself in the marketplace, and he was beset with deep despair and grief. And he heard his name being called by Shams, but from the spirit world. And so as he continued to hear his name, he would start to spin. He'd keep hearing his name and he would keep spinning. And that was the genesis of the whirling dervishes. Because as he began to spin, it was a vortex that brought him back into himself, where he could see his own belovedness, and that Shams was a reflection of that belovedness, and that everything was an expression of the divine belovedness of the universe. So that the beloved is one. And we're really talking about a deeper kind of love, not the superficial kind of love that's conditional, that leaves when it becomes difficult, but the abiding kind of love that is actually something that is gritty, the kind of love where that individual is committed and not going to leave when things become difficult. That's the kind of love I ask all of you to cultivate in relationship to your friends, to your family, and to yourself. So that it's not the superficial kind of love, but it's a love that's at depth, it's a no nonsense kind of love, right? A love that could be counted on at any time and in any way, that is bound by an understanding of sacrifice. Because sacrifice, and as parents, you understand sacrifice just as some dancers do, right? It's the most profound kind of love, because you're willing to put your life on the line for that kind of loving. And so, with that, I believe we will conclude with a song of thanks, of gratitude. And I pray that you celebrate every day as Valentine's Day. Every day is an opportunity to deepen your love to yourself and your relations. And that you begin to cultivate that perception and experience of your own intrinsic belovedness, so that the world will continue to reflect back to you your belovedness in all of its various forms of the people around you, so that you can actually receive that love that they are expressing toward you, and that you in turn can express to them. Gratitude is the wings of prayer. And so I sing a song of gratitude. This particular song is one of my wife's favorite songs. Walk on walk on Tunkashalas want me to share one more thing with you, which is that the earth and the ancestors and the source constantly bombard us with signs of their love. Particularly our relations that dwell on the other side, they come in various forms, perhaps an animal or a winged one. They always show themselves to make sure that we are never alone and that we are constantly loved. So pay attention to those signs and those symbols and those omens that are ever present and constantly ensuring that they are with us and that they love us. And with that, I look forward to our next conversation and wish you all much love and beautiful dreams in these nights to come. Aho mitako yasi.
Thank you so much, Philip. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments that are bombarding you with love as signs. Lori Trilling says, my favorite Thanksgiving song. Linda says, love the love. Thank you, beloved Phillip Scott. Radiant Star Dancer, thank you so much. Blessings. And Cheryl Hickey says, live in the present and receive this gift. It's just been a really special evening with you. Invite everyone to share this out, and just in the next 4 days, just really make it an intention to share this out. And also, I just want to say that here in the connection field at this point, everything is a gift. And if you feel so inspired, and Philip comes here and donates a ceremony to donate, you can send a donation to donate2goodofthewhole.org and put your little blessing to Philip or whoever you want it to go to, and we will make sure that they get that. So especially on this time of exchange of and weaving of love, this is really important that we open our hearts. And thank you for that, Philip, about don't give away your heart, give the love away, and keep that heart contained. And I think that's such an amazing message. And I know that it's one that I'm going to take forward. So blessings, everyone. Thank you on Facebook. We'll be back for the Japa Mala at 10 p.m. and with Charlie Riverman. And with that, we just waves of love out around the planet and to all beings, all relations. So thank you so much.
Aho.